The Outdoor Life Network presents The Thin Green Line.
Hello, I'm Adam Warback, and in this episode of The Thin Green Line, we'll try to unravel the tangle of myths and rumors that have obscured the reality of two of today's most talked about environmental issues, global warming and species extinction. In our first segment, we join global warming guru Ross Gelbspan for a journey into the not-so-distant future, into a world where our environment, our economic and political lives, and our very ability to survive will be threatened by dramatic climatic changes. Most scientists say the evidence is irrefutable, the heat is on, the changes have already begun, but is it too late? The Thin Green Line investigates. Global warming has always been a tough concept to grasp, but not anymore. Mother Nature has supplied the facts. The 1998 ice storm that paralyzed parts of Quebec and New England, the horrendous fires in Florida, Mexico, and Brazil, killer heat waves in Texas, India, and the Middle East during the summer of 1999, plus flooding in China that left 14 million people homeless, more flooding in Bangladesh that left 30 million people homeless, devastating hurricane casualties in Central America, and record drought in the northeastern United States. According to most scientists, this is exactly the pattern of weather events projected as the early stages of global warming.
1998 just replaced 97 as the hottest year on record. Scientists have determined that the decade of the 90s is the hottest, at least in this millennium, and the planet is heating faster than at any time in the last 10,000 years.
But only now, after floods and droughts, do we seem to be waking up to facts brought to public attention back in 1988, when the UN created an international panel to study an ominous phenomenon. The Earth was getting hotter.
Their biggest challenge was really to find out whether this was natural changes in the climate, as has happened throughout all of history, or whether this was really due to human activities.
In 1995, the UN released their conclusion. The cause of the warming? A buildup of oil and coal emissions from more than a century of industrialization. When factories, homes, and cars burn fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, for energy, the chemical byproduct, carbon dioxide, collects in the atmosphere. The buildup of this carbon dioxide gas then acts as a blanket, trapping heat on the Earth below. Scientists call this the greenhouse effect.
Basically, each year, we're pumping 6 billion tons of carbon into an atmosphere whose upper limit is only about 12 miles overhead.
The fossil fuel industry has found some scientists who say this is not necessarily bad.
With a doubling of CO2, cotton growers can look forward to yields that are 60% and more greater than what they are at present-day levels.
In terms of plant growth, it's nothing but beneficial.
But what about its effects on humans? That question led Gelbspan to uncover a conspiracy of denial and deception by the oil and coal industry.
I was an investigative reporter for 30 years. And there came to me a doctor who was specializing in the area of the spread of disease and climate change. I read his articles in the medical journals. I thought this was important. People should know about it. So he and I collaborated on a piece that ran in the Washington Post. And after the piece appeared, I got a number of letters from people who were saying this disease stuff is all very well and good, but we don't believe global warming is happening. And they referred me to the work of several of these greenhouse skeptics.
So the climate is always fluctuating, and there is nothing in what we have seen in the last 100 years that looks any different from these fluctuations.
I was very relieved. I thought the issue was totally stuck in uncertainty. And I told my wife there's no story here, basically. We don't really know what's happening.
Gelbspan then discovered that some of the loudest skeptics were financed by the fossil fuel industry, which has an immense stake in denying the reality of global warming. As masters of an annual trillion-dollar commerce, they would stand to lose billions if the burning of fossil fuels were ever limited.
The fossil fuel lobby began to mount a very, very extensive campaign of deception and disinformation to poo-poo the whole issue, to tell the public and the press and policymakers first that it's not happening, then that it's not proven, and finally that it really won't make very much difference in any case.
And today, the greening of planet Earth remains a very positive vision of life in our world.
Yet there are still TV news reports speculating about the spread of tropical diseases and about sea levels rising 2 feet or more.
The increase in atmospheric CO2 is a benefit that will occur around the globe regardless of where you're located. There'll always be some benefit for somebody, for everybody perhaps.
If you think back to the tobacco controversies, today no self-respecting reporter or editor would give the same weight to a lung disease specialist as they would to a tobacco industry scientist. But for the longest time, they were doing that in the case of global warming.
But even as the disinformation campaign created doubt among the public, nature herself provided the most convincing case for concern. There seems to be no denying it. Global warming is upon us. Is there anything that can save us from imminent disaster? Find out what the experts say when the Thin Green Line continues. In part 2 of our segment on global warming, we hear from the experts about solutions that could save us from the pending disaster that we've brought upon ourselves. Even if increasing temperatures and an unstable climate are somehow argued as normal, there's no denying global warming is disfiguring the face of planet Earth in significant ways.
The deep oceans are warming up, and that has caused the breakup of 3 large pieces of Antarctic ice shelves since 1995, and it's also changed El Nino patterns. It's fueling more severe and frequent El Ninos. It is causing most of the Earth's glaciers to melt at accelerating rates. The biggest glacier in the Andes in Peru 20 years ago was melting by 14 feet a year. Today it's retreating by 99 feet a year. The tundra, which for thousands of years absorbed carbon dioxide and methane, now is thawing and releasing those gases back into the atmosphere. The permafrost in parts of Alaska and Siberia is turning to pea soup. And we've actually changed the timing of the seasons. Because of the buildup of CO2 in the atmosphere, spring is now arriving a week earlier in the northern hemisphere than it did 20 years ago.
But the fuel industry says the hotter the better.
The climatic optimum was 4,000 to 7,000 years ago. It was about as warm as they're predicting is going to occur at the end of the next century. And it was a great period for human beings, for plants and animals. The little climatic optimum was 1,300 to 1,000 years ago, and again
led to tremendous advances in city building, in exploration, in cathedral building, in university building, because people were not victims to the cold climates.
But climate change now threatens public health. Diseases like the deadly outbreak of encephalitis in New York have spread northward as mosquitoes now flourish in northern latitudes.
So you are now seeing cases of malaria break out in New Jersey and in Ohio and in New York State. These are locally transmitted cases, not airport cases of malaria. You're seeing dengue fever and yellow fever break out in populations that have never before experienced it. Globally, malaria has quadrupled in the last 5 years.
Although no one can predict what will happen next, most scientists don't anticipate a single cataclysmic event. Instead, they project an ongoing series of regional assaults on the planet.
I think you're going to see more and more strong storms like the 315-mile-an-hour tornado that devastated Oklahoma City, like these more intense hurricanes that are happening. I think you're going to see a succession of these extreme weather events that eventually are going to start tearing holes in the fabric of the global economy.
The insurance business was the first industry to acknowledge global warming. Weather-related disaster claims have increased sixfold since the 1980s.
These large insurance companies are very concerned that if nothing is done to stabilize the climate, it could bankrupt the industry.
Many politicians also acknowledge the problem, but that's all. When Clinton and Gore took office in 1992, they pledged to cut greenhouse gases to 1990 levels by the year 2000. Instead, the amount of carbon released into the atmosphere has increased every year.
The time when CO2 levels were something like 10 times current levels was when the dinosaurs were running around, and that was when the plant growth was so vigorous that they created all the oil and gas that we now use. It was a very fertile period of time for the Earth.
Although the outlook in many ways looks bleak, except for plants and dinosaurs, there are possible solutions.
To allow the climate to restabilize requires that globally we cut our emissions by 70%. And that essentially means a transition globally to solar energy, to wind power, to fuel cells and hydrogen and biomass and hydropower. And all these technologies exist. They can give us all the energy we use today and more. Well, there's nothing inevitable about catastrophe if people begin to do the right thing. If we see the potential of rewiring the planet, of changing our energy sources, if we realize that this has to involve the developing countries as well as our own, because the global climate envelops us all, and this is really an issue of protecting our own national security. If we understand the positive potentials here, it's not inevitable. I think we can take steps to reduce our emissions, to substitute our sources of energy, and to allow the global climate to restabilize in the same hospitable mode that it has served us for the last 10,000 years.
To learn more about global warming, pick up a copy of Gelbspan's book, The Heat is On, or check our website for related links.